Please welcome Ryan O'Sullivan. He is the Director of Content Analytics and Pricing at Rakuten Kobo, where he is responsible for business intelligence, reading data analytics, and optimization of pricing and promotions. For over 18 years, he has been working in book retail, utilizing data to get the right book into the right hands while also optimizing the bottom line. Previously, Ryan was the Director of Online Supply Chain at Indigo Books and Music Online. Please welcome Ryan O'Sullivan.
No one left when the title slide showed up and the name of this presentation showed, so that's already a massive win. I'd already planned what happened if half of the room walked out, so I can stick with my primary presentation. Back in sort of the late fall, I was working on my 2016 operating plan, and I was taking a look at sort of our plans for pricing activities for the year, and I realized that as we transitioned to agency, if I didn't figure out a way to start putting myself out there and getting this information into your hands, I was going to be out of a job. So like, all great people who used to be really good at something, I now can show up at places and talk about it instead of actually doing it. Over to you, agency publishers. Just a quick, Neha already introduced me. I am Ryan James O'Sullivan. I am the Director of Content Analytics at Rakuten Kobo. That means I am responsible for publisher analytics, so any of the analytics that you see that comes from Kobo that goes to publishers, that comes from my shop. I'm responsible for pricing, also responsible for sales and promotion optimization. I am a big geek. My favorite part about this slide and this room is I have destroyed many of you in Mario Kart, so it has like more credibility when I come and I throw this up here. I'm also a huge sports fan, so if you want to follow me on Twitter and see me sort of be geeky and rant about sports on the weekend, you can do that. See me pictures on Instagram, me doing those things. And if you want to offer me a job, how dare you? I just told you I have a job. You can find me on LinkedIn. Any questions we don't cover during any Q&A that we get to at the end today, there's my email address. So what do we want to accomplish here today? It's really straightforward. I want you all to walk out of here as pricing experts. That's a lofty goal, so let's set the bar here. I want to give you the basic introduction that I would give a new analyst starting with me on my pricing optimization team. I want to get some of the sort of structural basics in place that you can walk away from here and think about pricing in a new way and think about pricing in a structured way that follows the approach that we take. Quick, economics, pricing the customer, bucking the lifestyle, get to what that means, and just some miscellaneous learnings that I couldn't sort of shoehorn into the other slides that I felt were important. I got a couple laughs in the introduction there. I hope you enjoyed that. This now is going to become an economics primer, and going forward, there's lots of graphs and charts and stuff, so sorry, this is it. One simple question I want to answer, though, if you're a publisher sitting here today, if I was asked the question, what is the optimal price for my book? That's what I want to walk towards as we sort of work through these different sections. So, microeconomics 101. Is anyone in the room an economist? Yeah. I'm going to have to ask you guys to leave. Economics is a very interesting sort of academic discipline where sometimes when business idiots come and explain it, we take liberties, so I apologize up front. You can stay. What is price? So this is the very basic question. This will not be a surprise to anyone, but price is the money. It is the amount of money that a customer is willing to pay for a given product. What I kind of wanted to highlight, though, is that price also represents the value of the product, and it represents the value of the product to specific segments and groups of customers. And that'll become important as we start to work through this. You're going to see as we move along that price is very much a dynamic thing, and it means different things to different groups of customers. And that's a theme that's going to play out. So just keep in mind this sort of notion of value as we move through, because it's going to be very important. See, I promised this would get here quick. What is a demand curve? So this is a demand curve, and what this tells us along the y-axis, a given price, along the x-axis, how many units would be consumed. So this starts to get you thinking around right away. When I set my price for my book at a certain level, that's going to generate a certain level of demand. And this sort of is if you learn nothing else in this economics section, if this is where you check out and go to sleep, this is the one. And it's really important because it shows, it really, really underlines the importance of when you peg a price, there's a consumer response to it. And that's what you're actually looking here. This is, economics is a sort of behavioral, a study of behavior. And this very much is the sort of mindset you want to take when you're approaching pricing. The shape of that demand curve is defined by something called elasticity. And elasticity of demand it's used to measure how responsive a change in price is to a change in units. And demand is said to be elastic when the change in price, percent change in price exceeds that of the change in units. Opposite is true, that's what we call inelastic demand. So what happens here is sort of the shape of this curve is defined by sort of the relative elasticity of the product. And you can get this if you have full access to data and you can change your price and you can fully manipulate the market, you can actually get a curve like this for each and every one of your books. That's not great. So this is sort of what that actually looks like in practice. So on the left is sort of a very steep inelastic demand curve. And that means that a significant change in price, so if you go from P1 to P2, it has a very minimal impact to units. It moves from Q1 to Q2 along the bottom. So if you're in a position where you have an inelastic product, sort of any price you choose along the sort of probability of prices is going to actually have a very small impact to demand. Whereas elastic demand, any small change in price, so from P1 to P2, results in a significant change in quantity demanded. One last piece before I sort of move into some practical examples of what this looks like is just the notion of profit motive and profit maximization. This is a very basic economic concept that says over time, sort of at the aggregate level, businesses will make decisions to optimize fully for profit. And that doesn't mean that you're going to, because as publishers and as retailers of cultural products, we have the notion of author brands, long-term strategies across series. Sort of how you optimize for profit can be a little more nuanced than in some other goods, but it's really important to understand that when you're approaching price, this is what you're looking for. This is what drives your decisions, sort of if you realize it or not. Because if the goal is to build an author brand and get to a place where you're getting your books in the hands of as many customers as possible, it is actually aligned with this. They're not mutually exclusive. So this is an example book just to sort of put this all together. This is a relatively elastic demand curve and sort of at all the different points on the line. So it's $8, it's call it 75 units and sort of on down. And it starts to show you, this is actually a real book that came out of one of our tests. And this demand curve turns into something a little more practical and a little more useful when you see sort of, I call this the margin probability curve in our business. So you see at these different points, you get unit numbers, which units times the price gives you the revenue. And all of a sudden you have this sort of academic theoretical demand curve that has very real implications to how you set your price and what the sort of economics of your title starts to look like. So to really put a point on it, where revenue is sort of maximized, that's your optimal profit. Now, going back to sort of long-term, thinking about revenue in the long term, we could be talking about an author here who, I don't know, they're a debut author, you've signed them for a 3-book series. You might actually want to lean more in the favor of the unit optimized. So if you go to $2, you can see there's actually a significant increase in the amount of units you get as well, while not giving up too much margin. If you get to the point where you're thinking about it at that level of detail, that's a very good news story. But it becomes, when you start thinking about these terms and you take the data and you start building out these demand curves and you start to think about it in these terms, you can see that it's actually pretty straightforward here. I charge $3, I make the most money, I have a decent amount of units, or I can charge $2 and I can build the author brand while not eroding too much from margin. That's sort of the discipline of taking these sort of very, again, business idiot, simple explanations of complex economic concepts and taking them to how you can actually practically price your product. So what is the optimal price? We're going to start building towards what the optimal price is. The takeaway I want here is that it is the price, the optimal price is the price where you'll make the most over the long term. You want to optimize for long-term revenue. I think that's super important in a cultural business. We do sell culture, and it's important that you have a balanced strategy, and we'll get to more of what sort of the strategy long-term looks like as we go through. And just a really simple optimal price is the point on the demand curve where units times price is the greatest. More revenue, better story. Easy enough, right? But how? So that was a lot of economics. Here's the bat flip. Maybe you like kittens. My team is partial to otters. There we go. See? We made it through the economics lesson. That was brilliant. So price and the customer, and this is where we start to actually, there's a problem with my keychain, and it's going to become annoying as we go through the presentation. I apologize. Price and the customer. So usually when we show up and we talk at these conferences, we always end up putting up a price histogram that looks like this. And we'll sit up here for 15 minutes and say some very intelligent words about this graph. Ooh, look, there's books and there's prices. And if we're really good, this was us talking 4 or 5 years ago. Actually, hopefully Michael Tamlin doesn't watch this because I'm actually like chirping a presentation he gave 4 or 5 years ago on ebook pricing. Gotten a little smarter since then. If you're really good, you show up and you talk about genres. It's like, ooh, look, this is the histogram of, that looks like fiction. And sure, that was enough in the past, but the reality is price is getting a lot more complex. We're in a space where it's getting more and more hyper-competitive, both within the formats internally for reading, but also in terms of competition for time and attention. So you've got to start getting really good at this. The reality is, price actually looks like this. This is Jill, an actual real Kobo customer, not the lady in the picture. That is a lady in a picture reading on a Kobo. Bless my creative team, but this is Jill. Take my word on it. And I'm actually basing her on a real customer here. She buys 5.5 ebooks a month. 5% of her purchases are made with a coupon or other promotion. She very rarely buys more than a book at a time, so she doesn't pantry load. She shows up in the store, she buys what she wants, she leaves. She's been a customer with us since 2013. In terms of lifetime value and contribution to yours and my bottom line, she is definitely one of the top customers. So pricing starts to look a little bit more like this. Now, I just told you how this is a terrible cop-out that oversimplifies things. So let's start breaking Jill's purchasing habits down into a couple layers. Now, I took this customer completely at random and did a little bit of a lot of analysis on it. So she's actually not the most interesting customer, but it's amazing how even with a customer who is not sort of cherry-picked out, you can find some things right away that are very, very interesting. So here's Jill's price preference by genre in different price bands. And the colors render okay. Kids in fiction look kind of similar. She doesn't have much kids in the library, lucky for us. She's primarily a fiction buyer. You can sort of see that right away. She does weave in and out of genre. It tends to be on the lower end of the price range. Interestingly, nonfiction, there's the traditional notion of nonfiction is more expensive. She's probably likely reading narrative nonfiction on sale. You see that sort of down in the lower price range. That is the case. I have the benefit of access to the data. Some of the things I will make some assumptions, I'll point them out, but it's things I've gone and actually looked at once I sort of saw various interesting pieces here. Jill's self-pub preference. Now, to be clear, Jill doesn't have a self-pub preference. Jill has no bloody idea what books are self-pub and which are not. But you can see the orange color are what we consider part of part of our KWL program, so it's self-published. And it's really interesting, this will become a theme, that in the lower price bands, when Jill just shows up to the store and she wants to spend $3, $4, relatively low on the spectrum, she is ending up purchasing a self-pub book to a point where 55% of all of her purchases across this whole spectrum are coming from self-pub. And again, it makes you, Jill does not know that these books are self-pub. Jill has a price preference, and it's being served by a market that is not the people in this room, which is interesting and will become a takeaway because we're going to look at a romance customer grouping in a bit, and we will see this again. Jill's publishing age preference. So this is when Jill buys, how old are the books at the time that she buys them? And it's interesting. So I define front, mid, and back here. Front is the first 90 days. Mid is from 3 to 6 months. Mid is from 3 to 12 months, and then back is 12 months and beyond. Sort of terrible broad strokes, traditional definitions of sort of titles. And you can see in the more expensive range, pretty much completely it's newer books. And there's 3 authors that make up everything north of $12 and north. So it very much, it's an important lesson that the author brand loyalty certainly will open up a world where you can charge more for the book. But by and large, her taste preferences are far south of where sort of many of the traditional agency list prices sit on a default basis. So just to sort of summarize some things we learned from Jill, she's a value-oriented customer until she's not. There are things that will pull her away from the lower end of the price spectrum, but by and large, she does buy in and around that, call it $4.99 is sort of like at Kobo is sort of one of our magic promo price points. You can see it's the type of thing that pulls Jill into the store. She buys self-pub, but only when they're cheap. There's no brand loyalty there. She is showing up in the store. She is looking for something at a certain price, and she is buying it. It's interesting that she's not a strong genre customer. This is the space self-pub traditionally serves. She's actually a fiction customer. Now, metadata, tagging of titles, there's room for error there, but there's a strong pull towards non-genre categories there. And there are, again, just to drive it home, there are groups of authors where she will pay virtually any price. That $17 price point for, I think it's 2 authors, she's far and away not shopping there any other time. So the thing we learned from Jill is that the price has to be oriented to the potential customer of your book. And it's not about your book and its like titles, it's about your book and the customer that it serves. And it's the customers that it serves and the different groups of customers that you serve. So you couldn't possibly hope to publish and price and build a marketing campaign around Jill. Wouldn't be practical. What you need to do is you need to start working on figuring out how you get to, with both data you have and with data your retail partners have, segmenting your customers. On the fly, getting to a place where you can find groups of Jill. And this is a couple examples of segmentation characteristics that we use. There are plenty more. You can get into things like reading data, reading speed, but these are sort of like the really straightforward ones, and they're ones that you could get to probably relatively easy with the data you have and or the relationships with your retail partners that you have. Genre preference, that old chestnut. Price preference. Again, you see that Jill has very clear price preferences here. And they're dynamic. There is a mode at which she shows up in the store on a normal everyday basis. And there's the mode where she gets pulled in by a new release by an author that she cares about and is engaged with. There's the promotional preference. So there are customers who will not show up in the store. I forget what the percentage of traffic is, but at Kobo, it's an insane percent of our traffic that actually gets triggered off of our CRM emails. It's not even based on the richness of the offer. It's that reminder to get the customer in the store. So it's those touch points. It's CRM. It's when you're offering a strong offering. How does the customer respond to that? There's also the competitive risk. So talking about self-pub, talking about romance as a very easy example, that's a space where if you're publishing romance books and you're not terrified by what I just showed you, and we'll show you in a moment, it gets worse, you really need to rethink things. So if you're operating a space that's highly competitive and you have customers who are buying products that are highly competitive, that's a segmentation characteristic as well. And publication age preference, again, if you have a strong author brand that's going to pull people into the store, that informs what you do with price. So instead of this guy, we segment it, we get this. This is your standard romance customer. This is a significant part of our base, probably by far our one of, if not our most valuable customer segments. And you'll notice that they don't really spend anything above $10. Stop for a moment and think about your list prices. If you're in romance space in particular, you should feel uncomfortable right now. But this is a customer group, and in this segment, there are tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of customers who would fit this segment characteristic. This is a big part of the digital business you're looking at right here. Hit it on the head, north of 10, non-existent. To throw one of the pivots that we looked at a second ago, self-pub in this space is really, really interesting. The space south of $5, it even trails into 6, is almost completely, not completely, but it's very strongly represented by self-pub. And there's a supply and a demand question there. There is plenty of romance supply in that space. There's plenty of self-pub supply in the romance titles that these customers are consuming. But again, the overall picture for this customer segment, it sits at 55%. So across this whole spectrum, self-pub represents 55% of the titles consumed by this segment. And you can see it's happening at price points where if you put the supply version, you can put the sort of like agency list price in these buckets, sort of the number of titles available. It's just there is so much catalog at these price points that these customers are consuming that's coming from self-pub and just isn't there from traditional publishers. And this sort of highlights the importance of really understanding who your customer is, because right now, if you're pricing based on like titles, if you're doing the things you've always done and you've not really thought about the customer with the whole view of the data that's available to you, you could be comping your previous titles while completely missing the customer side. And that's the real worry here, and that's what's kind of scary about this. That should sort of make you take note. So pricing the customer. When pricing the book, do not think about the comparable book. Think about the customer. At some point, in some future, you'll be able to look at comparable books because you did such a damn good job the last time you priced the book. It was based off the customer segments that you can go back to doing comp books. But in the meantime, like it's in your interest, I think, to sort of take this new approach to thinking about this and rethinking sort of how you price your books, throw out the old models, take a step back. And you could very well, you do this. I know you do this. You think about the customer. But find as many data points as you can, hit up your retail partners, really go at them to find out, hey, we have this big book coming up. The last title by this author, what does that customer base look like? Not how many did it sell, what channels did it sell in? Really, who is the customer? That's the question you want to be asking. So that's pricing the customer. Just to... Good? Feeling good. All right. You're still with me. You're laughing. So bucking the life cycle. So, warning, the following slides may depress you. If you are in any way, shape, or form involved in the creation, sales, or distribution of books, this is a good audience. We'll move on. And this won't be a surprise, but it's really important to understand this. When you release a book, and this is digital, we looked at a couple years, there are 3 or 4 outcomes for what the sales of your book are going to look like. And this applies to, it's over 95, I think it's like 98%. This is what can happen to your book. It comes out, It can be a slope, so it comes out, it peaks, and it goes down. It's a hill. It has a bit of a slower start. It builds up over like a 2, 3, 4 week period. Hill can be a little bit flexible. Or it's stairs. It comes out and it just has a steady customer, a steady level of demand, or it's low visibility and sort of just chugs along at its own rate. And over half titles are slopes. About 35% is hill, and stairs is actually relatively uncommon. These are shapes of curves. There are books in slope that peak week is tens of thousands. There are books that the peak of that slope is 10. So it's a scary world out there. These are the fields of backlist and inattention. When I put this up, I did this presentation last week. I put this slide up. I was asked if I ever get invited back places again. I'm already ahead with this showing of the presentation, so that's good. But remember elasticity. So now I can't hold this back anymore. I have to answer the question of just how elastic is the demand for ebooks. And the truth is, the elasticity of demand for ebooks, all things being equal, is actually pretty inelastic. Sort of no matter what you do in terms of price, you're going to see very little change in units, because price is just one part of it. So it's a scary place, but there's hope. So it becomes a question of how you find new visibility, because just popping back, when you look at these curves, like we're not talking about, when we think about price traditionally, if you're really honest about it, book comes out, it has a list price. Maybe something goes really wrong, it doesn't meet your expectations, you course correct. But then price tends to sit for 3, 6, 12 months. So what you need to start thinking about is how you can develop promotions with your partners, with your marketing channels, and how you can really sort of change the balance here. And the key is experimentation. So I'm going to share a couple examples now and talk through some things that we've had success with. And they've had, you'll see, they're very, very interesting. So this is a title by a big household name author. When we pitched this, I thought Sarah and Nathan were crazy. But it turns out that they were right, and that's sort of that's the risk that you have to take here. Being wrong to find the truth through the data has to be okay. So you really have to be willing to put yourself out there. So this is a massive author where the price was dropped in the 3rd week. It's kind of hard to see. Yeah, it's really hard to see on this screen, but the color of the line changes as average selling price in the week goes down. So it's sort of black in all the other spaces on here, and then it's red. And you see this one crazy spike driven by this one-time promotion with sort of like the full weight of Kobo behind it. And again, this is an author who would sell on their own, and I thought for sure we'd be in a place where we'd be eroding sales. But it turns out I was wrong. So versus this would be a slope title typically. So typically the peak would be at that first week. That peak is actually thousands of units. The success of the title actually sort of really drives the axis down, makes it look skewed. But take my word for it, that first week is actually big on its own. Never mind what happens in the 3rd week. So the question becomes, like, did we erode sales here? Was this a bad thing for lifetime value? Was this a bad bet? And the answer is no. So the last book that came out from that author, it was a 44% increase in revenue, in our case margin, but it translates perfectly to publisher revenue as well, from the previous book from the author. So right away, I think I've got 26 weeks worth of sales here. That in that 26 weeks, we've comped plus 44% the entire sales of the previous book from this author. If you control for a bunch of variables there, size of our business, market share, number of customers we have, you would expect the books to be in and around even. This is a massive story. The interesting piece, though, is when you look at the readership side. So when you look at the consumer side and you look at the customers who engage with this, it's a 150% increase in the readership versus the previous book. So this is completely new customers coming to this author by way of giving them a price that is in line with their expectations and in line with what they're willing to pay. So that's a biggie. And again, to be clear, I thought for sure we were crazy when we did that, and it turns out I was very wrong. And that you have to let the data drive you there. You have to be willing to take a chance, and that chance, that risk, was significant. So here's example number 2. So this was a debut author who the publisher really wanted to get behind. They wanted to really, this was building an author brand from scratch. I think they'd signed for a couple books, and they were sort of all in. So came out, good slope story. I think we had some support behind the book. Started to see a very aggressive slope. So you'll see this when the first week was really driven by the amount that sort of like we and the publisher put our weight fully behind the title. And you can see that sort of when you take that attention off, it falls off really quickly. The sales fall off really quickly. So then what happens is in the 3rd or 4th week, we get an agreed sale price with the publisher. We focus on it again. We push more attention to it. And you find, again, a whole new range of customers for that at that different price. And this is an interesting one because you see sort of continual experimentation here. Those blips that you see all along are actually exercises in drawing the demand curve. So that was the publisher with a little bit of help from us, making sure that the book was featured on the homepage, because if you don't get scale, you can't get a test. You'll not get significance. That's trying a whole bunch of different prices. And if you do that, you can charge $9, $8, $7, $6, and you can start to get a feel for what that looks like. Now, you have to learn sort of you have to learn how to relate. Is this a slope title? There's a natural erosion that's expected. You have to control for that type of stuff. But there it is. And this was a big story. If you take out all of these experimental blips, you would reduce the overall sales for the title by 24%. So if you were to just take a forecasted run rate for what this title should have performed, it's an incremental 24% in revenue. And again, this was a relatively unknown author. This was just price and some good old-fashioned retail and featuring. So what you want to do is you want to identify sort of the type of title that you have, and you want to change its life cycle. This is bucking the life cycle. You have your title forecasts. You know how your titles sell. It's pretty straightforward. When I was at Indigo, it's the same sort of deal. Most titles fall into a few models, and it's straightforward. And the bottom line is conversion is king here. So you want to get to a place where you're thinking about when you're putting these experiments together, when you're socializing it with with retail partners, when you're thinking about putting together your marketing plans, you've got to think about how you get different pieces of the puzzle here to drive conversion. So conversion is made up of, it's a very simple calculation, conversion equal views divided by purchases. So the number of the people who look at the thing and purchase it, that is a very straightforward definition of conversion. And it starts to bring all of this stuff together. So you look at views. So you have customers looking at your books every single day. Some of them purchase, some of them convert, some of them don't. And if you start thinking about segmentation, if you take an author who is if you take a customer rather who is highly loyal to an author brand in, say, the romance space, they're going to buy. They're going to show up to the store, they're going to buy. If you have that standard romance customer, though, who is unwilling to pay anything over $4.99, you need to come up with a separate strategy. It's a separate targeting exercise. It's a separate price. It's a much more robust exercise in developing not a price, but a pricing strategy. And along the life cycle, like you wanted that, I don't know, the one book we showed, in the slope week there where you have that strong peak, you want the price to be $15.99 if you're guaranteed that the loyal customers for that book are going to show up and pay $15.99. But if they stop showing up in the third or fourth week, you need to go from serving the red customer to serving the yellow customer to serving the green customer, to borrow the terrible visualization, but there it is. So you have to think about, for each of the different price points that you adopt, you should be thinking about who you're talking to with that price point. And you should be doing that on a regular basis. That should be a discipline that you get into where you're continually experimenting. And the retailer has a role to play here as well. And you should definitely, if you have a title you believe in, if you want to start experimenting, you should be coming to us and you should be saying, what are you doing to feature this title? Are you putting it through your CRM channels? Are you featuring it in social? And for you guys working with us to come up with prices that address those different groups of customers, he stick handles very carefully, you should have an expectation of data analysis coming back, or at the very least seeing some data back. When you're giving us promotion titles and we're working on these promotions together, you shouldn't just do it without asking for anything. This is me giving myself work. It's actually probably really important that you guys learn which customers are engaging with those promotions, so when the next time we do it, we all can be smart. We all can be smarter. We can get to a place where we know what these different groups look like and the prices we need to get at. And the publishers, think about your marketing campaigns and how they target these different groups. Again, your social, you're getting your author engagement out there. It's using all of your traditional marketing channels to address different audiences. It's not thinking broadly. It's not thinking in terms of that $15.99 first price. It's thinking about having a wide range of prices that are going to speak to a wide range of people. The other piece of conversion is just driving the purchase. The retailer has a lot to do here, so it's, we're doing customer targeting as well. Inmar speaking about our recommendations engine earlier. We also do price discounting. We do, where we can, we do promotional discounting. On the publisher side, we have the list price that comes from the publishers, obviously, again, anchoring list prices that make sense to different consumer groups. But there's also metadata as well. Having metadata that speaks to these, this is not my area of expertise at all, but having metadata that speaks to the customer groups that you're targeting is also equally as important. It's really, really important. So bucking the life cycle is the bottom line. The thing to take away here is price is not a single point in time. What you want is a robust pricing strategy. You need many price points that are based on continual experimentation and adjustment that speak to a robust, varied group of customers. That's bucking the life cycle. One more round. You're all still with me. All right, see, the honors are cute, right? The honors are cute. All right, just some miscellaneous learnings. I can't believe I'm going to get this thing to come in on time. Fantastic. Price ceilings are real. Price ceilings are very, very real. You saw it in romance. Unless you have an author who has a very strong following, if you're charging north of $10, you are missing, I can't definitively say this, but it is highly likely, it is highly probable you are missing a significant chunk of revenue. Amazon has banged on about many things in terms of pricing over the years. This is the one thing they're right about. They've been saying from the go that consumers won't pay over $9.99. They're full of shit there. They're wrong. It's not $9.99, but it's actually not that far north. Price ceilings are very real, and you need to start thinking about your different product categories and where the ceiling is. This one you can do with sales data. This one is very easy. To take a look at in your different, however you chunk up your titles from genre, however you do like title analysis, take that, look at the prices people pay for it. You're going to find that your supply and your demand are completely out of whack, and it breaks at a very particular point, and it depends on the customer group and it depends on the title group. Okay. Because, you guys are trying to put me out of a job moving to the agency pricing model. It's not a complaint. I'm going to give you something very valuable. When The slides come out from this. Take this slide and take a good hard look at it. This is the maximum discount across wholesale, and this one doesn't have, this one's just wholesale. We have an agency light version as well. Very nice. Maybe I'll share it with you from when we were in agency light. And this shows for all of the retailers, us included and various other retailers, what the maximum discounting was. Each circle here is a product. What the maximum discounting was based on the list price. So on the x-axis is the list price, and up the y-axis is the discounting percent. It says Amazon. It's actually a mislabel. It is actually the maximum. It is whoever was key in the territory. And what you see is there's a couple distinct price. You can actually see a couple different retailers' price strategies here. So when we had the ability to discount, we were taking your list prices and we were discounting them significantly. This is what market price actually looked like when you were under wholesale or when you were under agency light. And I assure you, and Neha said it in the introduction, I have spent 18 years in this industry getting every dollar I can out of every book I sell. I don't do this with ease. I give away every dollar grudgingly, and I am very much in this picture as well. An interesting note on price ceilings, if you can figure out what that little curve is after $12.99, you'll know what the price ceiling in Canada looks like. And a certain retailer pushing very hard to $9.99. Sales data isn't enough, and that's where we come in. That's where this is a partnership. You guys bring the inventory, we'll bring the customers together, we'll come up with a data story that gets us to a place where we can talk intelligently along these lines. So just to drive it home, what is the optimal price? It maximizes long-term revenue. It's oriented to the customer segment of your product, customer segments, because it is multiple. And any given price that you charge should be part of a robust pricing strategy. Price is not a single destination. Price is continual experimentation. It is targeting different groups at different times, all with the goal of maximizing that long-term revenue. And that's it.